Okay, we can start. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for attending, for being here today. Just 1 second, I have to admit some people who are in the waiting room. I started the recording, so everything will be online soon after the end of this lecture. So this is the second synchronous lecture of this course. It's articulated the course, as you know, in 9 hours of teaching, and therefore we will have another asynchronous lecture in May, synchronous lecture in May. And then we have 6 hours of synchronous lectures plus 3 hours of asynchronous lectures. About the asynchronous lectures, let me share the screen because I wanted to update you on the situation. So now you should see over your screen my screen, of course, which I shared, with the web page in Virtuale of our course. So here, as I reminded you last time, you can find the teaching material, and in particular the slides, which I will use today. You can find, of course, the slides that I used last time. And you may remember that we had a couple of pools last time. So I will open the lecture today by showing you the results through a word cloud of the questions that you provided, the answers that you provided to the questions of the second pool. But let's postpone this. We will see them in a few minutes. What I would like to focus on now is a summary of the available information. So we have the slide of the first asynchronous lecture, and then the slides are divided into 2 parts. We used the first part last time. I will use the second part today. So here in Virtuale, you can read, you can download and read the slides that I will use today. And then there are 2 example papers which were the basis for the asynchronous lectures. The first paper co-authored by me was the subject of the first video, asynchronous video, which I hope that you had the opportunity to watch. The second paper is the one we focused on with the second video that was made available this week. Last week, I think it was on Thursday. I made on Wednesday, actually. I made it available. And it's related to a paper titled Why Most Published Research Findings Are False. And I hope you had the opportunity to watch it, but if you didn't, it's no problem at all, because you don't need to follow the suggested sequence. You can attend today, even if you didn't watch the 2 videos of the 2 asynchronous lectures. There will be another video which will be made available around May 10, which is related to the 3rd hour of asynchronous lecturing, the last one. So basically, with respect to what we had so far, you are still missing the lecture today, the next lecture in mid of May, synchronous one, and you are missing a 3rd video, which will come around May 10, and then you are done. So today, I want to focus once again on a refined discussion on how to read a paper. But in doing that, I will also introduce some tips that are useful for the second part of the course, how to write a paper. So today it will be a kind of a mix, finishing how to read and starting how to write, and possibly maybe that I also use the 3rd block of lectures, how to write a scientific paper. which is available below. I will show you later the third block of slides and how to download them if we use them today. Now, let's start the lecture today by showing you the results of the replied you provided to the last questionnaire. I remember to you that the questionnaire had I remind you that the questionnaire had 4 questions. The first one was, what is your motivation to read a scientific paper? And this is the result. Let me show to you it here. This is the word cloud. So it is a cloud that is compiled by putting together 2 subsequent words. So you see that basically I see that your motivation is gaining scientific insights and new knowledge, and getting an information that is verified by experts. This is what I expected from you, actually. Second question, the second question was, what is your discipline? And I think this one is also very interesting, and let's see the results here. And I was expecting an interdisciplinary audience, and indeed, it's very interdisciplinary. I see a good representation of social sciences, which is something that I didn't expect to this extent. It is very useful to me also to tune my lecturing. The third question was related to why the scientific information can be trusted, and this is your result. So peer review, reproducibility, and after research, so supported by research, data transparency, and I see that there is the term peer review occurs very frequently. So interesting, once again, and why the information, last question, can be misleading. And this is what you wrote: data errors, wrong conclusions, and outdated information, undefined details, and failure of the peer review, maybe flawed methods. Interesting as well, because indeed this is an issue. So on the one hand, we read scientific papers because we want verified information. On the other hand, we know that this information can be, in some cases, misleading. And the reason why it may be misleading may be something that has nothing to do with the good intention of the researcher, or another reason why the information is misleading, maybe it's a kind of unethical behavior of the researcher who provides information that is either not complete or not really trustable. And indeed, in the second asynchronous video that I made available last week, we read together a paper that discussing why some information for the specific case of medicine can be misleading or false information presented by scientific papers. In that case, the reason for disinformation was mainly methodological. So the author analyzed cases where the experiments were not conducted in a very rigorous way. But as I mentioned, sometimes there is also an issue of unethical behavior. Unethical behavior which can be motivated by several reasons, including the fact that scientific publishing is essential for progressing in one's career. And therefore, this push for, also called publish or perish, this push for publishing may induce a kind of conscious or unconscious bias. The bias may be also unconscious in some of the cases. But whatever the reason is, it's important that we gain some skills in order to judge the validity of the information provided in a paper. But today we want to move forward again with the question how to read papers. And basically last time in the first synchronous lecture, we focused on the general features, general recommendations to approach the reading of a scientific paper. Today, I want to go into more details. I will also repeat some of the considerations that I made in the asynchronous videos, but I will try to get into more specific, today, more specific information. Let me get the presentation over the screen. And this is the first slide of the second group of slides, second PowerPoint file. And let me start by saying that usually what we recommend when we approach a paper is to structure the reading in subsequent passes. There is a first pass that is basically finalized to assess whether the paper is interesting. And indeed, we need to read a lot of papers. If we want to get an unbiased information, a complete information, we need to read a lot. But reading a lot takes a lot of time, of course, and therefore it is essential that we gain good skills in searching the relevant references first, and second, quickly assessing, once we have the paper in our hands, whether the paper is really interesting. This is why we suggest to make a first pass where we get the overview of the paper. And then if the paper looks interesting, then we may have a second pass, which goes us in understanding more details. And then if we really want into it, we may have a third pass, which is finalized to getting the science of it with full details. Of course, you may have 2 passes rather than 3, because you may decide that your second pass is also getting all the details. So this is not a rigid scheme. This is a scheme that we propose with the assumption that we have to read a paper that is quite analytical, quite demanding in terms of understanding the full list of details. Of course, if we read a commentary or read something that is more narrative, a first pass may be enough in order to get all the required information, or 2 passes may be enough. And again, this is not a rigid scheme. Keep in mind that flexibility and diversity are the keys to get an understanding of science. Flexibility, because it means that we have to adapt, depending on the discipline, depending on the type of the paper, depending on the journal, we have to adapt our approach. So it's extremely important that we are flexible. And diversity. Diversity means that we may want to get different information from different sources in order to get a more comprehensive and then more objective view. Perfect. So we have these 3 passes that we propose. So how to make the first pass? The first pass allows to get an overview, and then we have to quickly go through the paper by not hesitating to skip details. So in the first pass, if I see something that needs time, I can skip it. And if I see that something is not relevant for getting a general overview, a general understanding, so let's skip it. Of course, we need some experience. And so don't ask me how long should be in terms of time the first pass. The first pass may be ranging from 3 minutes, or if you are a very expert reader, or if you are very expert in the specific subject. Or maybe it may take also 1 day if you are at the beginning, at your start of, if you have to shape your experience. Don't worry, if during your first attempts you take a lot of time to read a scientific paper. When I started, it took to me for a single paper that was quite detailed, in order to gain a full understanding, it took to me about 20 days. And this is not exceptional. I mean, especially at the beginning, you may need to read other papers. You may need to look at the web to get additional information. Today, it's much easier because we have the search methods that are very, very good, including artificial intelligence, whatever you use, whatever provider of artificial intelligence you use. So it's easier, but still. But before I move forward, let me, because I forgot to say one important thing, where to find a paper. Okay, where to find a paper. So let's suppose that you need to find a paper where I can get it. So a couple, I already mentioned to you some of these repositories which can be used. Let me open a Google page and let me open Google Scholar. Google Scholar, I highly recommend it. Sorry, scholar.google. Okay, you see the web address, scholar.google.com, or you can search on Google for Google Scholar. And this is Google Scholar. It's a Google where you can put keywords in order to find papers. There are similar services provided by Elsevier through Scopus. And let me open a page with Scopus just to show you. Scopus, here it is, Scopus, let's see. Okay, here you see that there is a search for author, for, in this case for author, but you can also search for documents. You can search for the title, for other documents. So if I look at the title and then I write why the 2022 so yeah, Po River drought. Let's see if it finds my paper straight. Yeah, you see here why the 2022 Po River drought is the worst in the past 2 centuries. And here you get information on the link if you want to download the paper, and the journal, the authors, and the number of citations. The number of citations is an indicator, as we discussed, of the popularity of the contribution. If you click on the contribution in Scopus, you get to this page from which you can download the PDF. Now, Google Scholar, and there is an additional repository, Clarivate Analytics Web of Science. We are not exploring it here today because it takes a bit of time, but if you look over Google for Web of Science, you get it. Now, Google Scholar, let me close this window with Scopus. Let me see at the chart, any recommendation for journals for law papers? This is, okay. So, I see 2 questions on the chart, so let me reply to the questions. In the Virtuale page, there is not yet the final quiz, so be patient. And the final quiz can be taken from June. I hope to be able to open it earlier than that, but for now, I am allowed to make it available from June 12 to July 24. And you will be allowed to take it as many times as you like if you don't succeed at the first, because there is a threshold for gaining the badge. And if you don't succeed, you can repeat it. I am checking whether I can make it available earlier than that, but now I cannot for sure make it available. I will keep you updated on the final quiz because either I will send you an email or I hope to give you updated information in May during the last synchronous lecture. Another question, any recommendation for journals for law papers? So it's not my discipline, so unfortunately I'm not well prepared, but you can search over the web for the subject. So for instance, in Google Scholar, let me see, law journals. I don't think Google Scholar is the right place to search with. You can, okay, let me just try now in Google Scholar to show you how we can search for paper. So in Google Scholar, you can put, for instance, Montanari Alberto, and let's make 2023, and let's see what comes out. And you see that there are my papers published in 2023. And of course, you may find also papers by another Montanari Alberto, because there is another professor whose name is Montanari Alberto. So you may find, for instance, let's see, here, all of them are authored by me. Let me see, everything is by me in this first page, but if we move forward, okay, this is not me, management, sport management, or this is mine, this is mine, this is mine. This one, plasma and skeletal muscle free amino acids, this is not mine. And still it's A. Montanari. And maybe it's not really Alberto, but it's Alessandro, but anyway, just you have to browse it. It's possible to make searches also on with ChatGPT or another artificial intelligence provider. And you see that here there is the opportunity to download the PDF. And there are PDFs from several sources. Google Scholar is powered by Google. It's very comprehensive. It also includes papers that are not peer-reviewed, while also Scopus does include papers that are not peer-reviewed, so make sure of what you find. So let's go back to your question, low papers, so search for keywords. I don't think that here in Google Scholar, let's see, low of, let's be more specific, because low is too general. Low of let's say, institutional law. And let's see, international institutional law, this is a book. Yeah, because Google Scholar also includes books. Also, it may include gray literature. Gray is a synonym for peer and not peer-reviewed. The paradox, but here it doesn't, I mean, here it looks for titles. So let's, I would say that let's go with Scopus to try to answer your question. Scopus and journal list. Let me see. This is authors and Scopus journal list. So you have to find the journal list and search for discipline. Scopus indexed journals, okay? And here, let me check. There must be a search. And anyway, there must be, okay, let me see, filters. Clear filters, okay. Source type. You have to look for filters, and there is the discipline. And for about law, I think there are several subcategories. I'm not searching now, or let's see, enter subject area. Yeah, I found it. So enter subject area. So if you look at art and humanities, there is probably not explicitly law, but you will see something like subcategories, and you have to look here, okay? And I'm not going into details. If you're interested in getting more details, send me an email and we can discuss by email this, because we cannot discuss it now. And a suggestion, administrative law, tax law, okay, this is fine. Let me see, transnational taxation. Yes, you have to find for these subcategories, okay. Thank you. Let's close here. And let's go back to the presentation here. Okay, so more details. This is the paper which I discuss in my second asynchronous video, okay? And this is a reminder to remember that you have also to analyze critically what you read. So first pass, quickly speaking, what should we look at? First, the title. The title is a concise description of the main topic, and the title is also an indicator of the attitude of the author. So the title may use a different style, and from the style used in the title, you understand a lot of things. And also, if the title is very clear, is very responsive to your demand for information, it's a good sign. So I said the title may have several different styles. What do I mean? The title may be a question, like why the Po River drought is the worst in 2 centuries. Maybe a statement, maybe a mix of the two, because a question usually ends with a question mark. For the case of my paper, why the Po River drought is the worst in the past 2 centuries, is a question, but it's already providing a part of the answer. So it is saying, I'm telling you why. So it's not an open question. It's a question followed by the anticipation that there is a reply. And it's a bit ambitious. I mean, a title like Why the Po River Drought is the Worst in 2 centuries, it's a bit ambitious. And it means that the author has a kind of ambition of providing an important conclusion. And also the question, if it is a question, it may also be very ambitious, like, why did we fail in understanding the water cycle so far? Question mark. It's, I mean, it's ambitious, even if it is a question. Or maybe, and this is the style that authors use when they want to keep a low profile, maybe a simple summary of what you did, like an assessment of the human impact on climate through simulation. So this is low profile, because you say this is a study that through a specific method provides some information on an open research question. So try to get used also in your discipline, because it is discipline dependent, on the different attitudes that the authors may use when framing a title. And when it will be the time to write a paper for you, think a lot about the title. We will have a slide that is coming later. Okay, so the title is the first information. Sometimes it happens that I read the title and I say, so Google Scholar, I see the title and I say, no, this is not what I'm looking for. And I don't look at the paper. Abstract, the abstract is extremely important. And keep in mind that the abstract is the first information and often the only information editors read about the paper. So you submit a paper and the editor looks at the abstract and say, this is not good, I'm going to reject it. Because the abstract not only provides a summary of what you did, but it should also be clear, very to the point, synthetic, not much longer, not very technical. So I often tell my students, don't write a technical abstract, because the people, if they start to see numbers and acronyms, no acronyms in the abstract. So if you read a paper, and if I read a paper, and I see in the abstract a lot of acronyms, a lot of information that is not transparent, I discard it and I say, no, this cannot be nice, cannot be interesting. Because if the abstract is confused, I mean, think about the paper then. If the abstract is confused, what about the full paper? It's confusing for sure. Actually, sometimes this is not true. Sometimes the authors write the abstract as the last thing before submission, and they are so fed up by writing that they don't care about the abstract. So it may happen that a paper, an interesting paper, has a poor abstract, but this is not anyway a good thing. In any case, the abstract is the second thing that you should read, and in most of the cases, I reject, I don't read the paper, I discard the paper after reading the abstract. Fine. And then after reading the abstract, and if I think that the paper deserves, I go to the introduction. And I also look at the figures, because the figures are an excellent vehicle of condensed information. So it's reasonable that you look at the figures in order to better understand. So what are they presenting here? It's much easier to look at figures than reading the whole paper. And when I read the introduction, very often, I don't read the full of it. I skip sections. For instance, some papers start with a motivation for the work. The motivation of the work, in most of the cases for a reader, it's not really what the reader is looking for. Very often I'm looking for new methods, for new conclusions, new results. And if the motivation, when I start reading, is too trivial, like stating the importance of the problem, I skip it. And it's not a good indicator for me of a paper that is really meaningful, because if a paper is really meaningful, we don't need to say, keep in mind this when you write, we don't need to say trivial things to start. It's much better to start with a meaningful sentence. And then when I am at the end of the introduction, very often I quickly go through the paper. And if you look at the asynchronous video that I made available last week, there are details on how I read it, and then I go to the conclusions. And or if there is a discussion section, a discussion session. This is my first pass. And then very often, I browse a lot of papers and I read like 10% of them. The second pass is about 10% of them. This is because today there are so many papers that you really need to look at a lot of contributions, but on the other hand, you really need to be selective. Otherwise, you spend all of your time to read papers and then you don't write them. We want to write papers also, of course. This is a summary, because I was also looking for meaningful figures over the web, which are open and provide a nice summary, just because I believe that figures are more effective in conveying the message with respect to slides that are full of text. And so these are remarks that are related to creating a title. So this is a useful indication for you when it comes to the point of writing. But on the other hand, it's useful also to get suggestions on the kind of information that a title can give to you. So write the title after you finish writing your paper. Keep it clear, concise, and attractive. And a recommendation that is not here, but I want to give you, take your time. It's extremely important that you write a very good title, that you create a very interesting title. So don't reserve the last minute to it, because you may lose readers. Remember, there are several reasons for writing papers, including, as I said, pushing your career forward, but don't forget the essential reason why you write a paper: to get read by people. So don't forget it. And it's not so trivial. There are some people, some researchers who don't want to be read, but typically, if you are really looking for success, the first target should be to be read. And therefore, take your time, discuss with your co-authors, and with a meaningful discussion, and let the title rest a little bit and reconsider it the next day after sleeping over it. Extremely important. But let's move through these points. Ensure that the title isn't too long or too short when you write. One thing, look at the journal requirements. We will discuss these details when we will dedicate the full lecture to writing. Check the journal requirements. Some of them impose a limitation on the length of the title. Use keywords and phrases from your paper in the title, that's fine. Ensure that the title indicates exactly what your research is about. This is not a trivial suggestion. Sometimes you see titles that don't reflect what the research is about. Check whether the title reflects the tone of your paper, because the title has a tone, as we said, and the paper has a tone. Avoid using acronyms, abbreviation, and jargon. Jargon, keep this word in mind. Jargon means exaggeration, overstating. It's not appreciated, never, by editors, reviewers, readers. Avoid jargon. And ensure that your paper delivers what the title promises. Okay, very good. Again, these are suggestions for writing. And these are suggestions for the abstract, for writing the abstract. But again, it is useful to read also with the mindset of the reader, okay? Because it tells us what information we have to look for. So write the abstract after writing the full paper, that's fine. Even if, I must tell you, it happened to me once that I wanted to start a paper from the abstract because I thought I really need to make clear also to myself what is my target, what I want to demonstrate. And then I shaped the paper. Of course, I had already the results in my hands. I shaped the paper according to the abstract. But in general, this is not the way it should be. In general, it's much better to start with the paper and then writing the abstract at the end of the story. Think of the reader. Write an engaging, clear, and concise abstract. Include the most significant findings, and etc. I don't think we need to write all of this. And I just want you to get this information. And one thing, there are several ways, several interpretations of how a paper should be read and written. When it comes to writing, keep in mind that I really think that our polar star should be transparency, reproducibility, and ethical rigor. Okay, so don't get tempted to get trapped into salami publishing, so incremental publication. Don't get trapped in the temptation of hiding weaknesses with lower transparency. Sometimes we may recognize weaknesses in our work, in our research activity. If we see weaknesses, it's much better, in my opinion, to be transparent about them. Because the fact that research is weak doesn't mean necessarily that it shouldn't be published. I think it is extremely interesting to read experiments or investigation assessments, review of the literature, with a clear and transparent presentation of what the researcher, the author think is weak in the paper. It is not easy, but just try to get the mindset. At the beginning of my career, I was convinced also by my advisor that weaknesses were a real weakness that shouldn't be presented with transparency. But then I realized with experience and with several consultations with colleagues that, I mean, it's not easy, but honest and fair presentations of our doubts about what we did is sometimes making the difference between a paper that it's not conveying any message and a very meaningful one, and maybe make a difference in the number of citations, in the popularity of the paper and yourself. Okay, second pass. I don't think we need to discuss it in greater details with respect to what I already anticipated to you today. The second pass is finalized to get more details. So yes, this looks interesting, but let me understand how the methodology works. And in understanding the details, we can still separate two levels. And this is why I suggest a second and a third pass. This is what I usually do. So there is one thing is understanding, but without the ambition of reproducing what has been done. Another thing is understanding and reproducing. And I tell you one thing that I suggest to my students. And I often tell them, of course, my discipline is quantitative, is analytical. So we often have computations to do. And we often use softwares to make these computations. So I tell my students, with your second pass, you get a knowledge of the methods, and you can reproduce these methods with the software. But you wouldn't be able, with the second pass, to create software. It's a different story. Using a software, you just need to look at the manual and understanding what instruction to give at the PC. Creating the software means really reproducing the results. Means that you make the computation, you understand the computation. So I tell my students, second pass, you could reproduce the results with the software. Third pass leads you to get the information needed to create the software, which is what generally the authors did. So one thing is to reproduce everything by using the codes written by the authors, which today are increasingly available. Another thing is writing the code. And this is, to me, the difference between the second and the third pass. So in the second pass, you look at the methods, for instance, and in the first pass, usually I don't look at the methods. You understand what is behind it, and you understand the general picture. But in the second pass, you wouldn't be able to repeat it unless you use something very pre-prepared. You are not independent on your management of this research, okay? And the second pass takes, of course, a longer time because the end of the story is something that brings you to an advanced knowledge. Let me see. Third pass, and then we make the break. Here we go into the full details. And full details means that if you are, for instance, a reviewer of the paper, you need the third pass. You need to really ask yourself the question, if there is a mistake here, can you get it? If there is some failure, weakness, can you get it? With the second pass, usually I don't get a perception of the weakness, unless it is really something very, very clear. And usually with the third pass, I look at the equations and maybe that I try to try to derive these equations. I look at the numbers of the results. I look at the units. I look at the figure caption in detail, because the figure caption is something that usually in this first and maybe also second pass, I skip. And in the third pass, I may look at the list of the references to check whether I need additional details, because sometimes in the paper, there is something that you cannot understand because there is the reference. So like we use the Rayleigh equation parentheses referee. So if I want to know what is the Rayleigh equation, I get the reference on Google Scholar, I put the title in Google Scholar, I get the reference, and I study the reference. And I study the other paper. So in the third pass, I may need to get additional information. And this is the workflow that we suggest in order to get an in-depth analysis. Let me conclude before the break, and then we make a 15-minute break, by reporting to you that sometimes I also wrote emails to the authors like, look, I read your paper, I went through it, it's very interesting, I would like to use it for my researches, please clarify how you did this, this, and this. Or sometimes I write to ask for the data because the data are to be made available, but in some of the cases, many journals, as we discussed last time, require the use to make the data open, but sometimes they are not made fully open for reasons of the fact that the data may be owned by institutions. And then if we need to get them, we need to contact the authors. So, I mean, in my in-depth assessment of a paper, sometimes I write the authors and I myself receive, and I'm very happy when I receive them. I receive requests for clarifications. And sometimes I also got emails, messages pointing out to potential weaknesses or mistakes. It happened to me to do that. I had to make a correction of a paper. Corrections are, I mean, perfectly fine. If you realize that there is a mistake in the paper, then you publish a correction. Sometimes corrections are published for missing references that are not specified correctly. So far, I published only one correction, and the reason was that the list of the references was not including a reference cited into the paper. Well, I think, let me see what is the next one. Okay, let's then make the break now, so 15 minutes. Again, I turn registration off, which means that you will find 2 videos for today's lecture in our repositories. And if you have any questions, meanwhile, feel free to write in the chat. When I come back, I will read the chat. Thanks, and see you in 15 minutes.